Hi, I'm Dr. Stephen Sideroff, and I just had this really quite enlightening conversation on the Kim Sorrell show. And we covered so much territory. And in particular, we covered ideas that I have incorporated into my book, The Nine Pillars of Resilience, The Proven Path to Master Stress, Slow Aging, and Increase Vitality. And Kim was a great interviewer, and we covered so much great information. I encourage you to check it out.
Welcome to the show. I am so happy that you're here. You are going to be so happy that you're here because I have got this incredible guest. I'm a speaker, I'm an author. I get to do a lot of great things and fun things in life. My favorite thing is to meet new people and really get to know them and know what it is that they're doing. There are so many people doing so many incredible things in this world, and I get to meet them and talk to them. I got the greatest job in the world. So today is absolutely no exception. You are going to love this guy, and he is going to give us information galore on handling stress, on resilience, on all kinds of things. And so I want to welcome to the show, Stephen Sideroff. Sideroff. I'm so sorry. Say it.
Sideroff.
Sideroff. Oh, there's an R. Yeah, that makes sense. Sideroff. So Stephen Sideroff, you're Dr. Stephen Sideroff, and you've done so much in your life. And so I just kind of want to start with, before we get into all of your wisdom on handling stress, on dealing with different things in life and all of that, I want people to know who you are. So I want to hear about 8-year-old Stephen.
Well, my childhood was pretty well blessed, I'm very happy to say. So I had such wonderful times growing up. One of my big blessings was that my grandparents had a farm. I grew up in New York City, so in the midst of tall buildings all over. But my grandparents had a farm about 40 miles outside of New York City, and I spent all my early summers there. And that was what was beautiful about that was in the morning I could walk out the door and not worry about traffic, not worry about cars, not worry about anything, and just run all over the place. He had 100 acres and growing corn and potatoes, etc., with a barn. So it was an idyllic childhood. And, I was a swimming instructor, a water skiing instructor, also growing up. And so I had all these opportunities to teach other people. I was a head swimming instructor, and I loved teaching other people, children, how to swim. And it was really a challenge to me to figure out how to get them to learn the different strokes. And so I came up with all my own kinds of inventions of, like having their elbow, imagine they're being attached to a puppeteer so that when they turn their head, they had the string connected here and here so that they moved their arm and their head at the same time. I really loved doing that. I was really interested in learning and memory and how the brain worked to create learning and memory. And so my early work in psychology was in brain research. And I was very fortunate to be an assistant professor in my first position at McGill University in Montreal, and was mentored. One of my first mentors was Donald Hebb, one of the pioneers in neuroscience. He's the one who coined the term neurons that fire together, wire together, and was something that rung true to me. And I started my career working with animals, putting electrodes in different areas of their brain to really learn about where learning takes place and how it takes place. But I wanted to ask my subjects how they were feeling, and you can't do that with animals.
No, but I gotta say, it's a good thing that you were a farm boy part of your year each year. So animals were not a stranger to you. I know people, I've met people my age that have never been in an area where there's a cow, only have seen cows on TV, never touched a cow. It's
Right.
like, wow, how do you get through life with never touching a cow? I don't know how that happens, but apparently it happens. So yeah, I can totally see that. I do have to say one other thing to you, Stephen, and that is most kids are not you. Like you obviously had something special from the very beginning, like wanting to know how to teach these kids how to swim, developing a way to do it, wanting to know how the brain works. I mean, most kids, when they're in school, they're thinking about the girl in the bikini, not teaching the kids how to swim, right? And
Right.
so it's interesting and amazing that you then got your undergrad, went to med school, and then research the things that you wanted to research. I love it. So anyway, so you wanted to be able to ask questions to the animals, but you didn't speak
Right.
animal apparently.
Uh, So first, let me correct you. I didn't go to medical school. I'm a clinical psychologist, so I
Oh,
got
okay.
my PhD in clinical psychology, actually in physiological psychology, went into brain research, but then I switched into clinical because I wanted to work with humans, human animals, and be able to communicate with them and be able to address feelings. And so I I started out in working with addiction. And one of the things I discovered in my work with addiction and addicts was that when they became sober, one of the key factors in whether they relapsed or not was how they dealt with stress. They could be doing really well, but as soon as the stress levels increased, they began being more, they craved their substance of choice more and more. And so as I moved into all areas of clinical study, I continued to follow this track because, in fact, it turns out to be true for all of us that we could be doing well until the stresses pile up, and then it literally stretches our resources, stretches our cognitive functioning, our physiological functioning, and we begin to have more and more problems. And that was why I began to put my focus onto uh, uh, stress and how stress impacts us and how we can deal with that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you took so much time to do it. So at first I mispronounced your last name and then I put you in medical school, but you certainly have done plenty to put you where you're at today and the knowledge that you've built along the way through the research that you've done, through everything you've done. And stress is such a big deal, right? I mean, we all have it. I say all, maybe there's people who are stress free. I don't know any of those people.
Everybody has stress.
So everybody has stress. And it doesn't just work in your mind, but it hurts your body. It hurts relationships. It hurts every aspect of your life.
Yes.
So thank you for studying it. And thank you for what you're going to tell us.
Yeah. Well, some of the things I want to make sure we cover has such an importance for everybody because there are some good reasons why we all struggle with stress, and I'll get into that. But the first thing I did was I started doing workshops for executives back in 1980, and I thought, you know, everybody knows that they're struggling with stress. Everybody's going to want this, and everybody's going to want to take what I have to offer and run with it. And so I started doing these workshops, and people would come up to me and say, great workshop, great material. I love what you have to say. I'm going to be using it, etc. But invariably, when I would follow up with any of these people or any of the companies that I worked for, I found that just a few months later, none of them had continued to use all of this useful information. What's going on here?
No kidding.
What
Yeah.
is the disconnect? And that's when I began studying all the reasons why we have resistance to dealing with our stress. And we all do. And the first reason is that stress is not just bad, that stress and your stress response are useful tools that actually help you perform at your best. They motivate you, they mobilize you. If you have very low levels of stress, you're not as motivated, you're not able to be as focused. And so that's when I realized, Kim, if you think about all the successes you've had in your life, I guarantee that all or most have been connected with stress.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that. I was just talking to somebody yesterday about this and not even realizing what I was talking about with stress. But my dad could sell an igloo to an Eskimo. So the saying goes, right? My dad was a great salesman and he worked on commission for the first part of his life. And so commission, you got to be motivated, right? You got to do it. Well, he had this theory, this thing that he did that he swore by, and it was he would extend himself financially. So, like buy a new car that he owes on, or upgrade the house to whatever, he would stress himself financially. And that was huge motivation to then go be successful. And my dad ended up being one of the most successful men in our area, multimillionaire. He was an amazing man and an incredible businessman, but that was one of his practices.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. And
That makes sense?
it makes a lot of sense. And, in business, people pride themselves on how much they're doing and how much they're getting done. So remember my early mentor, Donald Hebb, neurons that fire together, wire together. So our brains have put those two things together unconsciously: success, stress. And so we are actually geared to look for stress in our lives. Now, here's the key. Here's the big key. You have to find your stress sweet spot. So if you think about the curve in terms of performance and stress, with low stress, performance is low. And then as you increase stress, performance gets better. But there's this sweet spot. And after that, when you keep pushing stress, performance and health start to drop off. And so what happens with most of us is we push ourselves beyond that sweet spot because we just have that connection, stress, success, and because stress is so prevalent in our lives today. If you think about your day, Kim, you know that you go from one stress to another to another. You finish one and then you're confronted with the next challenge in your day. We all are. But how many moments in your day are you confronted or presented with the opposite signal? Safety, relax. I don't have that in my day. I have to create it in my day. So we gear up for a stress, we handle it, but before we have the time to recover, we gear up for the next one, and then the next one, and the next one. Okay, this is the problem of today's stresses. So stress in itself can be good as long as you have some way of keeping it in balance with recovery of all the resources used up when you go through a stressful experience.
Oh my word. Yeah, relax and recovery. Those are not two words I grew up with my type A father living in my home. So that's very interesting to me, relax and recovery. I have a granddaughter who's a senior in high school. And when she studies, she's taken all the APs, she's doing all the stuff, right? And she's a very good student. And when she studies, she sets an alarm. and she'll study for this amount of time and then the alarm is a 10-minute break. And then she takes a break. She walks away from it. She goes get something to drink, maybe something to eat, rest, relax. When the buzzer goes off, she goes back to studying. And so somehow my granddaughter knows to rest and relax her brain, but I don't know this. So please
She's
teach
brilliant.
me.
She's brilliant.
Yeah. Well, she is.
Somehow she learns a very important life message, and she's starting young doing that. And most of us haven't learned that lesson, so we need to begin learning it. And it's not something like going over to the wall switch and flipping it on, and now you know, because the old patterns, our old patterns, are embedded in our neural networks. But the beauty of our capability is we have what's referred to as neuroplasticity. That's the ability to literally rewire our brains. But we have to, it's a training. So if you want to spend some time in your day practicing some form of relaxation, you have to set, like your granddaughter, you have to set an alarm, otherwise you won't do it. You have to make it a high intention, otherwise it won't happen. And you have to be consistent with this process. That's why in my book, The 9 Pillars of Resilience, I've laid it out as a step-by-step training for greater resilience, where each day you learn a new lesson and you do it day by day, step by step, and it supports you along my 9 pillars of resilience.
Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. It's one of those things, Stephen, I got to say, that it makes so much sense. It's like, well, why didn't I ever think about that before? Because it seems like a natural thing that we should just know. We should know that our bodies can only take so much. I'm a writer, and I think about when I've pushed myself and said, oh, I'm just going to do, one more chapter tonight. I'm going to get one more chapter done. I'm no good at it. Like I go back and read it and it's like, geez, nobody's going to want to read this. And I think it's because I've overdone, right? I haven't taken the time to relax and rewire. So how long does it take? How long of a break do you need from things?
So by the way, there's a lot of research that shows that when you're under too much stress, as I said, beyond that stress sweet spot, you actually have cognitive impairment along with physiological impairment as a consequence. So it's very important. How much time, how long does it take? I tell people start slow. If I have usually tell people it would be good to do a 15-minute relaxation, visualization, mindfulness, biofeedback exercise each day. However, 5 minutes is better than nothing. So you could start out with just 5 minutes a day and start getting into the habit. Because when you take 5 minutes, you're telling yourself this is important. You're telling yourself, I want to be healthier, I want to be smarter, and I'm doing that by taking these 5 minutes. And then you could start expanding it to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes. But whatever time you take to do that, what you're doing is you're directing your body into recovery mode. And you're getting your body accustomed to needing that recovery, which we typically ignore and push to the side and just keep going and going. I like to say that life is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Right. So true.
And if it's a marathon, you have to pace yourself. And the way you pace yourself, we have 2 branches to our nervous system, the sympathetic activating branch, the stress response, and then the parasympathetic recovery branch. And these 2 branches need to be in balance for health. For optimal health, you want these 2 systems in your body to be in balance. And so, as I said before, we have a lot of stimuli that trigger the stress response, but very few that trigger I'm safe recovery. We have to put that into our day, into our lives.
Yeah. Wow. That's so good. That's so good. And I'm wondering, how do you figure out the sweet spot? How do you know when you've been overstressed, when you're pushing the envelope?
Mhm. Well, that's a good question. And to begin with, I guarantee that everybody listening right now has gone beyond their sweet spot. Again, based on how our lives are constructed. They're constructed in which we encounter so many stresses in our lives. And then we have the background stresses of listening to the news, listening to disasters, listening to all these things that weigh on us and play another role in our stresses, even though we're not necessarily conscious of it. And so everybody has pushed themselves beyond. How do we know? You know, if you take 2 minutes to just stop, breathe, and tune into your body, you will notice some symptom of what I'm talking about. You may notice an activation in your chest. You may notice a tightness in your belly. You may already are experiencing symptoms of the imbalance. Irritable bowel disease is very much a stress-related disorder. A lot of other GI tract issues originate or are exacerbated by stress. High blood pressure, uh, headaches, frequency of colds. Stress impacts the functioning of our immune system. Stress impacts inflammation. In fact, right now, I'm writing an article that I've been invited to write for a publication called Chronic Stress as the Master Hallmark of Aging. So in the longevity field, there are 12 hallmarks of aging that have been identified. Cellular processes that are impaired, cells that die, mitochondria dysfunction, etc. And there are 12 different ones that overlap. Every single one of them is impaired and impacted by chronic stress. Okay. So we all have some either symptom or illness, chronic illness, that at least has a component of stress in them. Now, if we look at the other side of the coin of the process of healing, let me tell your audience something about healing. Our bodies have two choices, two primary choices, okay? We don't have an unlimited amount of energy, all right? Resources that we mobilize for all the things we do in our lives, everything, externally and internally, okay? So our bodies are always making choices. Your body has to make a choice to send energy to the kidney so it appropriately filters our blood, a key component of health, right? Now, if you foresee a danger, if you're experiencing a danger, a threat, which is what stresses are typically, we shift into the defend and protect mode, the fight or flight response, mobilizing our muscles in the service of dealing with whatever the danger is. But our body is making a choice. So it may be taking energy away from the digestive system for that preparing for fight or flight. In fact, you want to make sure one of the keys to health is you want to make sure when you sit down to have a meal that you could say to yourself, I'm safe, I can let down my guard. So you give your body the permission to digest its food. Something as simple as that. If you're sitting down and you're working while you're eating, your body's in the stress mode, but yet you're wanting it to digest your food. Those are two conflicting responses of the body.
That's so interesting. Uh, it's something that you don't think about, right? Because
Right.
I don't ever think about my kidneys unless I got a kidney stone or something, right? I don't think about my appendix or any part of my body, any part of my system.
Mhm.
And I am notorious for working while having a meal. And I went to Japan this past summer, and meals are sacred there. Like you cannot walk down the street and eat. Did you know that about Japan? You cannot have food in your hand, walk down the street while eating. Like that's so wrong there. A meal is a special time where you sit down and you enjoy the food and enjoy, sometimes people don't even talk during a meal because they're just focused on
Mhm.
the food going into their body. And I gotta say, I saw no obese Japanese people.
Mm.
Is that why? Is that part of it?
Well, let's focus on the first thing you said, which is the sacredness of sitting down and having a meal, in recognizing personal functions as being important and can't be overridden. Here, we feel we can override these. It's our will. We can do whatever we want, whenever we want, without consideration for how our bodies function optimally.
So true. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so with pain, if people have pain, if people have any kind of illness, then it's even more important to take time where you could say to yourself, I'm safe. I don't have to engage my fight or flight response, so I can more easily go into the parasympathetic recovery process. When I'm in that parasympathetic recovery process, my my body is going to use its energy for healing and maintenance and growth.
Mm. That's good. I like knowing this. I have to figure out how to put everything into practice, but I really like knowing this because it does make so much sense. You know, I'm curious about worry, where worry plays a part in stress, because in the Bible there's a passage that says, "Consider the lilies of the field, consider the birds of the air." Basically, if God's taking care of those things, how much more does He care for you? And so, worry is not something that we're supposed to do, right? I mean, it's fearing the future, and spending your time in the future isn't any good because you're going to get there eventually, and it might look way different than you think it's going to. So, how does worry play a part here?
Well, that's a great question because it brings up a lot of these principles that we're talking about. I already said that we have a limited amount of personal energy, and that any energy we use in fight or flight is being taken away from the body's healing and maintenance functions. So you could do that, but you can't do that consistently. Otherwise, your body's going to start to break down. Okay. So you want to use your energy wisely. You want to use your energy where it can have an impact, where it makes a difference. Worry is using energy with no benefit. Worry is using energy with no productive outcome because you're going around and around. People then say to me, well, you're being a Pollyanna. There's a lot of things to worry about. And I say, there are a lot of things to plan for. There are a lot of things to have what you're going to do if that happens. But once you do your appropriate planning, then you want to let go and focus on the positive. Any additional focus on something after you've come to a conclusion of what you're going to do is what I refer to as worry, which is wasting personal energy.
Mm.
Now, I can tell this to somebody who's a worrier, and they'll say, well, that's impossible, or I can't do it. And here is where my fifth pillar of resilience comes in, and that's mindset, mental mastery. Okay. We want to start with a growth mindset. And that means if you know you're doing something that's not serving you, you make the decision, I can engage in a process to learn to do it differently. But the key here is learn. Learning takes a while, right? Learning is not something that just happens immediately. So every time you catch yourself worrying, you have to remind yourself, this doesn't serve me. This is taking energy away from other things that I need the energy for. And then you shift into something more positive. And you could shift into simply one of your relaxation practices to help you turn down that activation. But I mean, that's my response to um, anxiety. That's my response to worry. Very similar, is that we're conditioned. You know, here's something very interesting, Kim. We are all subjected and subject to superstitious behavior. So I actually had a client who was a worrier, and she came to see me, and we were working on her anxiety and worry. And she said, when I take a test, I'm so anxious about taking that test. I don't get sleep the night before. I take the test, and then after the test, I worry about, did I fail? How did I do? And I thought, oh, wow, what's going on here? And I said to her, well, tell me, how do you do on your tests? And she said, much to my surprise, I always get an A.
Oh, that's so funny. But yet she worries.
So what we came to realize, and this was a big aha moment for her, was that she worried about how she was going to do, and then she got an A. And again, neurons that fire together, wired together. Her brain has put together, when I worry, I get A's. And she's linked the worrying to the reason that she does so well unconsciously, even though she does well in spite of the worrying. Okay. But this is how people develop anxiety and worry, is because they do it and then things turn out okay. And unconsciously, they think it turned out okay because they worried, because they were anxious.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That is so interesting. So what do you do about that? Like, what was your advice to her?
So we went through this training program, and everybody can do it. And by the way, this is also very, very important for people who have difficulty falling asleep, because there's a similar pattern that happens with most people who have difficulties, is they can't stop their brain. And they're
I'm guilty of that, I have to say. Yes.
okay. Well, I just put out a new program on how to get a good night's sleep. I'll have to share that with you.
Thank you.
Um, but again, with sleep, the same thing is, we get into bed and we can't turn our minds off. It's a time we try to problem solve. And so whether it's that or whether it's worry and anxiety, the first step is to make the decision, you don't want to do this anymore. And then people say, oh, well, of course I don't want to do it. But no, you have to really make that decision, because there's still a part of you, because of how your brain has paired that wants to keep doing it. So you have to make that decision. I don't want to do this anymore. Okay. Secondly, you have to decide that worry, for example, doesn't serve you. Okay. And so we're not talking about doing appropriate planning. It's the going over and over of things, and in particular, what might go wrong. That's the thing that needs to be stopped, and the thing that you can say, this doesn't serve me. Continuing to think about what can go wrong does not serve me. Okay. Then the next thing is, you have to, it'd be helpful if you're practicing a relaxation exercise, because over a period of time, you get better and better at breathing and relaxing. And then finally, you can't just say no to something without saying yes to something else. And the yes has to be something positive. So when we're worrying, the yes is what can go right. So let me give you a real life example in my own life that just happened. So I came back from, I was over the holidays, I was in Belize, And I came back and the fires were raging here in Los Angeles. So I came back, fires were already raging, and my neighborhood was right in the line of fire, and everybody in my neighborhood was evacuated. And so here I'm coming back, and you're kind of helpless in this situation. There's really nothing you can do, and you can't get into the neighborhood. I was my house was in a fire zone in 1982 in Malibu, and I stayed back and, with my hose.
Did it work?
I was in the house when the fires came over, and when the smoke filled the house and I couldn't stay in the house anymore, I went outside. The main fires had gone by, but there were little fires all around, including one by my propane tank, and I put it out with my hose.
Okay.
So, but this time I was evacuated. I wasn't there. And so from 1 minute to the next is when the wind changes and goes in one direction, you're fearful, and then it goes in the other direction, you're feeling okay. And so I had to manage my emotions and my worry big time. And I realized, number one, that it's important to allow myself to have my feelings, feel them, express them, but give them a time frame. So don't keep going over and over, because it's not helping me. And I need to be in a place where I'm more calm and relaxed, because so much is going on right now. I was thinking about the balance in the two branches of my nervous system, and consciously saying to myself, find the place, the times to go into recovery, recuperation. So it was a conscious decision on my part, knowing that I wasn't going to have recovery from the situation for who knows how long, and actually took quite a long time. Now the fire is coming toward my home, and I caught myself going into catastrophic expectations. My house is going to burn down. And I would be in that space of literally feeling the loss of my house and turning to ashes, because I saw other houses that had already been turned to ashes. And then I stopped myself and I said, it hasn't happened yet, and it may not happen. Don't go into this unnecessary place of pain prematurely. If you lose your house, there's plenty of time after that to feel all of that pain. Right now, what you want to do is go into the hopeful space that it's not going to burn down, and stay focused there. And so I use both cognitive and emotional tools to help myself navigate a very difficult situation.
Wow. Yeah. Man, that is so good to know that we have that much control really over our emotions, over our brains, and the
Right.
way we decide to think, the way we decide to react and do things.
Yes. And it begins by recognizing that that's possible, believing it's possible. We don't go to it's difficult. If it's the right way, it doesn't matter how difficult it is. And focusing on it being difficult only makes it more difficult. It gives you a different mindset that actually creates constriction in the body that makes it more difficult to go down the better path. So you go right to the positive possibilities, and you cultivate that mindset each day in your life. And again, in my book, this is what I help people do on a step-by-step, day-by-day basis, because it's a learning process. It's a training process. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah, no kidding. It doesn't happen overnight. I imagine that to be true. You know, it's interesting. I had like a real life bipolar, however you would say, completely different reactions situation. So years ago, years and years ago, I was 20, maybe 19. My father-in-law lost his job. I got married at 18, so I could have been 19. But my father-in-law was an insurance salesman and he lost his job. At the same time, my dad had built this company, but sold out to a conglomerate. And they kind of gave him an ultimatum because he started this other company. And so he lost his job. So here they're in the same position, the very same position. And at my father-in-law's house, everyone's crying. And like my husband's two little sisters went up and got their piggy banks. And everybody's not sure what's going to happen. How are we going to survive? How are we going to eat tomorrow? Like worried about everything and so upset about this life lost and all the bad things that are now going to happen. And my dad's house, it was, well, what am I going to do now? Well, shoot, let's look and figure out what am I going to do now? This is a great opportunity. It's an open door to make a change, to not be in that office anymore and instead do something else with my life. And so it was such different. It was exactly what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, you saw both right in front of you at the same time. That's great.
Yeah, yeah. I
And
prefer my
here-
dad's way of handling it.
Well, your dad's way is the more resilient way. Your dad's way is the way that helps preserve that personal energy that I'm talking about. Your dad's way helps you move forward more readily, and it doesn't create this constriction of fear that the other way produces. And so it is absolutely the better way.
Yeah, it's interesting because resilience, just that word, you see some people are very resilient in things. Things happen and they move on from it or they whatever deal with it at the time, but then they're okay. Then it's on to the next. And other people who can't seem to get rid of it, can't seem to be resilient at all. That whatever baggage it is just kind of carries with them through life. So tell me about that.
Well, this is one of the important aspects of how we deal with stress, how we deal with life, and that's early childhood learning. So our earliest learning is our survival learning. It's the learning about how to deal with life and how to deal with the world. And we have our primary caregivers as our models. And so we tend to follow doing it the way they do it. And those early lessons also have to do with the relationship with our primary caregivers. And that is how we form attachments. And we form healthy attachments or insecure attachments or fearful attachments based on how we are treated in our childhood. And even the best of parents are not perfect. Even the best of parents can have the stresses in their lives that distract them from being fully present with the child. The child can't say, oh, well, I understand my mom or my dad is busy. The child says, what am I doing wrong that my mother or father are not meeting my needs? We don't blame them. We tend to put it back on ourselves, which is, by the way, a healthy response, because if we said, well, my mother or father is not capable of it, that would create a hopelessness that we'd never get it. But if we blame ourselves now, okay, let me figure out a better way so that I get it from my parents, even though that's inaccurate. But we learn those lessons as a child, and then they don't serve us as adults. They keep us stuck. They keep us going after more and more money to fill our emotional needs, more and more conquests, when none of that, after the initial success, really will do the job. And so it's interesting. I find that a lot of people have difficulty taking in compliments and fully appreciating their successes. And I really emphasize that people own their successes, take in the compliments, because I refer to that as emotional nourishment. And those are the things that are healing, emotional nourishment. But we have to understand those forces impacting us as a child so that we can recognize how they're playing a role in our lives now.
Mm, wow. Yeah. Yeah. And so it's something that happens in early childhood or while you're growing up, but something that you can deal with as an adult, that you don't have to stay in that spot.
Absolutely. Again, a growth mindset. My fifth pillar, my sixth pillar is emotional balance and mastery. And that's recognizing what baggage you're carrying around from your childhood. It could be biases, it could be wounds, it could be not feeling good enough, not good about yourself. All these are things that can change, that you can move out of if you put the time and attention into doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I like that. I like that. So let's go on the other end of things. So we talk about childhood and all of that. But you also, right in your, I'm reading it right now. So it's the 9 pillars of resilience. I love your subtitle, The Proven Path to Master Stress, Slow Aging, and Increase Vitality. I want all 3 of those things, but slow aging, I want to hear about that.
Okay, so earlier I said to you that, by the way, proven method, I've taken my program into one of the wards, hospital wards, that was experiencing high levels of absenteeism, uh, physical symptoms. It was an AIDS oncology ward, very stressful. And I did an 8-week program there, and we were able to show that the people who took my program compared to controls had reduced absentee rates and had reduced physical symptoms, even a significant reduction in blood pressure. So we know that focusing on my particular program of resilience makes a difference. But so longevity, I talked earlier, and last year I did a whole summit on longevity. And as I said, there are these 12 hallmarks of aging, but chronic stress is the master hallmark. You can do all of these supplements and change your diet, but if you have stress, it's going to inevitably take a toll. Now, I'm about to do a study with a company that assesses biological age. So biological age is looking at your cells and cell methylation and the different biological processes in your body and your cells, and determines the actual aging of your body. And we're going to see if people who score the highest on my resilience questionnaire, which your audience can get from me, if they show the slowest aging. And I have a 1-case study of that so far. Of course, it's just 1 case, but it's myself. So I took the biological age test a couple of years ago, and my biological age came out 20 years younger than my chronological age.
Wow.
And I attribute it to my 9 pillars of resilience and the path that it prescribes for people to take based on the 9 pillars.
Well, my word, I want 20 years younger. I want my body to say that. I act 20, 50 years younger. I don't know. Sometimes I think I'm still a high school kid or something, but
That's good.
but
That's good.
but it is interesting to know if your body is aging faster than it should.
Yes,
And
so it's great for anybody to check out and really get their baseline right now. What is it? And then
yeah,
start doing some of the things, say, from my book, and see if that makes a difference.
well, that's the nice part to know is people get your book, they read your book, they put it into practice. Don't just read it, right?
Right?
But put it into practice that you can turn back the hands of time.
You can slow the hands of time. So, for example, if you start out where your biological age may be a few years older than your chronological age, you can bring it down to where it's lower than your chronological age.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So if you don't want to age too quickly, you want your body to be 20 years younger than your chronological age. That reason alone, buy the book. But there's so many good things, so many good parts about it. How does it affect relationships? You know, there's a lot of people who have a stressful relationship, and it can be hard to get away from a stressful relationship. So how do you deal with that?
Another good question. The first three of my pillars are about relationship. The first one is your relationship with yourself. How do you treat yourself? Are you critical, judgmental, or are you loving and accepting? The second is your relationship with others. And here, number one, it's about who you choose as relationships. Do you choose people where you have to walk on eggshells around them, where they may be critical of you, where you're always wondering where you stand with that person? Or are you choosing relationships where the other person is loving, accepting, where you know you could be however you are with that person? Now, just think about two situations. I'm with one person who I'm a little uncertain about, or they could be critical or judgmental. I'm going to have my guard up, not intentionally, but automatically, because there's some danger or threat there. When that happens, my body's going into fight or flight. With the other person, I feel good. I feel safe. I can let my guard down. Now my body's going into parasympathetic recovery. So multiply that by all the relationships you have. And you want to make sure you're spending as much time in relationships that offer this sense of acceptance, peace, and calm than more toxic or difficult relationships where you have to work at them or where there's uncertainty, etc. And so invariably when I'm talking to an audience, someone raises their hand and says, well, what if that difficult person is my spouse or my child or my parent
Good
or,
question.
or my boss, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Well, the key is that it's your responsibility to take care of yourself in those situations. Yes, it's too bad. And the first step is to give feedback where possible to people to let them know how they're impacting you. And I go into this in my chapter on relationship with others. But ultimately, however they relate to you, you want to, number one, probably spend less time with those people. But when you have to be with them, you want to protect yourself. How do I protect myself? You have to imagine your psychological boundary. And most people, your personal safe space is about arm's length out and all around you. When you're with a person that could be critical or judgmental, a boss or whoever, you want to imagine this is a more solid boundary, and that you don't allow their messages to reach you. Again, as with everything else, this takes practice. It takes practice. On the deeper level, you have to find the place inside of you that a critical or judgmental message lands, because it's probably landing in a place where you have some self-doubt. And that requires you taking a look at how that's my first pillar, relationship with yourself, because ultimately, if you have a loving relationship with yourself, where you're loving, accepting, compassionate, you will not allow those negative messages to reach you. And so if they're reaching you, we have to go back to pillar number one, your relationship with yourself. And we have to find where and how you talk to yourself in a negative or inappropriate way, where you're overly critical of yourself, where you put yourself down, where you doubt yourself. And you have to shift and begin developing a healthier internal voice that comes from a place of love, compassion, acceptance, support, care, and joy. And that's a whole development in and of itself, again, that I go in that chapter on relationship with self.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And the words that you just used are very interesting. I spent a year figuring out the true meaning of love. I went on this eat, pray, love experience in Haiti mostly. And it was a crazy time. But when I was working on, I used 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, they call it. Love is patient, love is kind, does not envy, does not boast. You hear it at a lot of weddings. When I got to love keeps no record of wrongs, I was kind of dreading it because I thought, well, you might forget, but you don't forget the things that happen to you. But what I found out that meant is basically what you're saying is that we have more control than we realize. We control the narrative. We control the narrative. So instead of that rotten person that did that rotten thing to me, it can be, well, are they having a bad day? Maybe things aren't going well for them right now. Maybe things are just hard, that guy that just cut me off. Instead of honking your horn and getting all upset and letting your blood pressure rise, but just change the narrative. And you can change the narrative for things that have happened in the past. And also, you don't know people's exact intent, right? Because as far as I know, I'm not a mind reader. I don't know. Stephen, are you a mind reader? I no. Probably not. So we so often can assume bad, make a bad assumption, and that's our narrative. But we don't have to do that. Your narrative can stay positive.
Absolutely correct. I agree with everything you're saying. There's a great book called The Four Agreements by Miguel Ruiz. And he talks about, not making any assumptions because, you don't know what's going on with somebody else. But the other thing for all of us to consider is if I'm carrying anger and I say, I'm not going to let go of this anger unless that person apologizes or whatever holds us back. I always remind people that the only person being affected by you carrying that anger is yourself. The only person being hurt by carrying that anger is yourself, and you are being hurt. One of the things that's so enlightening about some of the research out, one of the things I do is biofeedback, where you monitor someone's physiology. You feed that information back to them so that they can get that under control. And we find that when we go into a state and a feeling state of gratitude, we actually enhance our physiology. That there's a particular heart rate rhythm called coherence, where as you breathe in, your heart rate goes up. As you breathe out, it goes down. And this beautiful rhythm occurs when we can let go, when we go into a place of gratitude. When we're in a state of anger, frustration, resentment, it becomes chaotic. And so it shows us directly how our emotional state affects our physiological state. Now, here's the kicker. If you and I were standing next to each other in the same room, and I put electrodes on your scalp, I would be able to pick up my heart rate in your brain waves.
Really? Tell me more.
Isn't that amazing?
It's so amazing.
Okay, so, our heart is the biggest engine motor in our body. It's powerful. It's so powerful that it can be detected in another person's brainwaves standing close enough to where I'm standing. So now this really transforms the conversation around the energy we project out into the world, positive or negative, because we are literally affecting the brainwaves of people around us. You can be with somebody and you could say, this feels so good to be with this person. And somebody else, and you're thinking, do I have something else I want to be doing? Right. And so I don't know how much is because of what I just talked about, but my hunch is it plays a role.
Oh, yeah. I would think a big role. I mean, what you just said is so true. There are certain people that you're drawn to that you want to be with, and other people that you're like, yeah, whatever. I had an experience just last week. They have a new neighbor, and because I bought a house and I have this new neighbor, and he was talking to my kids, my adult children, and he was going on and on about how bad the HOA is and how bad everything is and how bad they do this and that. And I had to just walk away because being in the midst of all that negativity I know isn't healthy for me. I can feel it. Like I needed to walk away from it.
Right. And this is my seventh pillar of resilience, presence. And presence has two directions. One is aware of what's going on around me, and the other is my presence and what I project out into the world.
Yeah, so true. So good. Man, Stephen, this has been so amazing. Everything that you've had to say, and I know that there's more, and the book goes into it a lot deeper. And so I encourage you all, buy the book, get it on Kindle, however you like to read. I personally do hard copy with a sharp or a highlighter in my hand and go through and highlight the areas I want to go back to. This is that kind of book that you want a highlighter in your hand and go back to things, be able to draw on things that you've already read. Stephen, how can people get in touch with you and get your book?
Well, my book is available everywhere. It's in bookstores, Barnes and Nobles. It's online on Amazon, and you can get it anywhere. My website is drstephensideroff.com, and there people can get my resilience assessment so that they can derive their personal resilience profile and see which are their areas of strength and which are their areas needing more work. They can also get an audio recording that's a relaxation exercise that they can practice with. And there's a lot of my articles and other things on my website that they would find of interest.
Wow, wow, that's very generous of you. So again, is drstephensideroff.com. Go there, and the resilience test is free. The book's available everywhere. Get the book, The 9 Pillars of Resilience. Stephen, thank you so much for being here and dropping all this gold on the audience.
My pleasure, Kim. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, you bet. And thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for being here. Share this, tell other people about it. People need to know this stuff. And until we see each other again, be blessed.